Today in this video, I'm going to compare the killing ability between a DC20 fighter and a D&D 5e fighter and see who is the better killer.
You tried to make me a killer! You are a killer.
You shouldn't have succumbed to that peer pressure, Michael. So delicious. Now, why are we choosing the fighter? Well, based on some data on D&D Beyond, we know that the fighter is the most popular class that's being played out there. In addition, human is the most played race. So we're going to take a DC20 human fighter and compare that to a D&D 5e fighter. Now, the one thing about the DC20 beta test, if you get their fighter and you also look at all the other classes, all their features actually stop at level 2. But there's something interesting about DC20's fighter. If you haven't noticed, it's really loaded up front. At level 1, you already come with a bunch of maneuvers that your character knows. In addition, at level 2, you get that attribute bonus. Now, in Dungeons and Dragons, that attribute or ability bonus doesn't come until 4th level. This tells you that the DC20 level 2 fighter is more comparable to a D&D 5e 4th level fighter. So we're going to create a 4th level fighter, because all the martial classes in DC20 are essentially Battle Master style type fighters. I'm going to spare you with all the boring details, but we have a level 2 fighter from DC20, comparing that to a D&D 5e fighter. Just go ahead and pause the screen if you'd like, take a quick look at all the numbers. Once again, I've mentioned to you guys in the past that DC20 is just a little bit more complicated than D&D 5e. I think just by looking at this character sheet, you can see that. And as we're doing these killing tests, I want you to also think about all the different options that occur in DC20 and compare that to D&D 5e. A lot of people hate this, but we want to see what's the minimum amount of damage that this fighter can do if he connects. And we're also going to look at the maximum damage that this fighter can do if they connect on every single hit as well. To start the killing test, we're going to do this thing called what I call the Bizarro fighter. Okay, so it's basically you fight the evil version of yourself. So let's look at that DC20 character sheet. We know what the PD is, we know what the attack bonuses are, and we also know that you have those 4 action points that you can use during combat. So I'm creating essentially an option 1 and an option 2. Now in option 1, the level 2 fighter already has the action surge, so they can spend 2 stamina points, turn those into action points, and do 2 additional attacks. Now because DC20 has those stacking disadvantages, it's going to be a lot more difficult for the fighter to actually connect on every single one of those 6 attacks. Now I created a 2-weapon fighter here because I wanted to make sure that we can get the maximum amount of attacks that will connect. And so what we're looking at here is the possibility of 6 attacks, but you can see you have stacking disadvantages. And by the time you're throwing that 6th attack, you're rolling 5 D20s and taking the lowest of those 20s. So in order to negate one of those disadvantages, we're going to use an action point to essentially get rid of that negative. And so what we're looking at here is option 2. We have an attack, 1 damage. The second attack for 2-weapon fighting gets advantage automatically. Then your third attack is going to have disadvantage 1. That means you're going to roll that extra D20, but we're going to spend that extra action point, costing it 2 points, to really just level out. So we got 3 different attacks here that have no penalties, but we still have those 2 action surge points. So we can convert those 2 action surge points to attacks, and now we can do an additional 2 attacks, but at disadvantage 2 and disadvantage 3. For option 1, we're going to have 6 attacks, all of which potentially at low can do 1 point of damage each. And for option 2, we have 5 attacks, and at low we can do 5 points of damage for each one of those, but our chances to hitting every single time are better for option 2. When it comes to killing Bizarro down Franco 3 for DC20, we know that we have a total of 11 hit points. So 6 attacks, 1 point each of those is not going to kill Bizarro us, and neither will the 5 attacks. But there's one thing to consider, and that's the amount of damage each attack has potentially to do. Now this is where DC20 really excels. Because of that tiered effect, we can look at every 5 points above our own PD, which is 12, and try to determine how much more extra damage we can do. So we can roll a natural 20, we have a +4 to our attack, that's 20 for at max that we can roll, And so if we have a +1 for every tier over that 5, which is going to be 17, 22, that's going to give +1, +1. And let's just say we hit that natural 20, that's going to give us an additional +2. That's going to give us a +4 to the attack. So that's 5 points of damage for every single attack. 5 times 6 is 30. But again, we're pushing up to that disadvantage 4 type of attack, which is going to be really hard for us to connect and make that kind of damage happen. Now, if we look at option 2, we improved our chances, but we reduced the number of attacks, but we can still inflict 25 points of damage. So we can see that with that 30 and that 25, we're more likely to kill our Bizarro self, but we're starting to think about those stacking of disadvantages for option 1. And if we look at option 2, we have at least 3 solid attacks that we can easily kill our Bizarro self. Now, the only downside is that we basically have to crit every single time because we can only inflict a +4 damage. That means that's going to give us 5 damage, and we're going to have to attack at least 3 times to kill our Bizarro evil self. Now, let's take a look at the D&D 5e fighter. Now, if you look at the D&D fighter attack options, there's really only attack, bonus action attack, and remember this, we're also creating a 2-weapon fighter for D&D 5e. That's going to be 2 attacks. Then we can use our second wind to have an additional action, which is attack again. That's going to do another 10 points of damage. 3 times do 30 points of damage. Significant amount of damage to that 48 to our Bizarro self. But if we crit on any one of those attacks, we're doubling those damages immediately. So any one of those could be a 20, and we have a 40. So we need to crit at least 2 times in order to kill Bizarro self. And let's not forget, those attacks in Dungeons and Dragons do not have any type of penalty associated with them. Now, the next killing test is going to be the murder hobo killing test. These murder hobos have to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho. Now, what is my obsession with these commoners? Do you ever wonder if you're just a commoner in the real world? Bunch of 10s across the board? Does this guy give you nightmares?
What the fuck have you done lately?
We know what a commoner looks like in D&D 5e, but we have really no idea what a commoner looks like in DC20. But if you look through that beta, even that alpha, and you look through the print, you're going to find a lot of information about that commoner. It's going to have 4 hit points, and we know that the base PD is going to be 8. We know the base MD is going to be 8. And again, if you continue to look through that text, there's one little DC tip here that tells us that if you're trying to perform to a group of commoners, that their charisma save will only be a +1. Now, I don't know if this is because it's a group of commoners or because at least one of the commoners has a +1. It didn't specify. So what I decided to do is I decided to go ahead and give those commoners a +1 to one of their attributes, which is charisma. In this case, they can use charisma as their attack if they wanted. But we know they have 4 hit points, but now at least we have stats that I derived from that DC20 beta so that we can use to attack with our fighters. But on the left here, we're looking at the DC20 commoner. You can see in the option 1, it's going to take at least your 4 regular action points, dealing 1 point of damage to kill just one commoner, right? The commoner has 4 health points. But one thing to think about is you can also inflict 5 points of damage for those first 2 attacks. Those will easily kill 2 commoners there. But then after that, you start imposing disadvantage to your attacks. But you could potentially kill 6 commoners, even though you have all those disadvantages. With option 2, we have less attacks. We have more probabilities there to kill. So that's going to give us at least 3 commoners that we can kill. The other ones having disadvantage on those attacks. Now, if we look at the fighter on D&D 5e, every single attack is 10 points of damage, guarantees a kill of those commoners because they only have 4 hit points. And now if you consider how easy it is to actually hit those commoners, you can see that in DC20, the PD is going to be 8. You have a +4 to hit. That means you need to roll 4 at least to hit that first PD. But remember, in order to really dispose of those commoners, you need to roll up higher towards the 1823 range to make sure you can kill them. Now, if we look at the commoner for Dungeons and Dragons, your fighter has a +6 to hit. That means it only needs to roll a 4, similar to DC20. However, we know it's guaranteed to kill every single time we hit. Now, when you consider the D&D 5e, they have an armor class of 10. Our bonus to attack is a +6. That means you only need to roll a 4 every single time you roll a 4, you kill a commoner. So again, the probability of killing a commoner in D&D 5e is a lot higher. In addition, every single attack is guaranteed to kill a commoner. Don't kill your commoners and ruin your Dungeon Master's game, okay? Now, the final killing test I want to do is based on the DC20's playtest adventure, The Hunted. I'm going to go straight for the final battle, the BBEG. Here's the stat block. If you haven't seen it, it's free. It's on DC20. So what we're looking at here is the BBEG for the Hunted playtest. Now, I really don't want to focus on all the details of this stat block, but what I want to do is just really focus on the HP that the BBEG has. It has 30. We know what our damage output's going to be, and we want to see how many hits will it take to kill this BBEG or monstrosity as it's listed here. Now, based on the PD, which is a 13, the different tiers to hit are 18 and 23. That's going to guarantee us +1 damage for each of those. And we know that the maximum roll we can get is a 24, and that includes if we crit with that exact same hit. So again, with the single blow, we have the potential of doing 5 points of damage. If we can do those 6 attacks, we'll be able to do 30 points of damage. That's option 1. But we're pushing all the way to disadvantage to do that. If we look at option 2, we improve our odds to connect and do a lot of damage. But again, our maximum damage output is 25. So using our maximum damage output for option 1, which has a lot of disadvantages, we can wipe out this big bad evil guy in one single round. It's going to be really, really difficult, but we can do it. If we go to option 2, we cannot knock out the big bad evil guy with option number 2 with only 25 points damage. Now, how can we compare this BBEG with D&D 5e Fighter? Now, the best way that I can think of is look at those hit points divided by the number of hit points that we have, which is essentially 2.72. Multiply that to our D&D 5e character, and that's going to give our BBEG 131 hit points. And when you think about maximum damage output, they're only going to be able to do 60 damage. That's definitely not going to be able to kill the BBEG in a single round or even a second round. So you really need to think about it. In DC20, you can do more attacks. You have the potential to do way more damage, but you have a lot of disadvantages there compared to D&D, where you're guaranteed hits a lot more often. The damage is not as high in terms of trying to defeat that BBEG. It's really up to you. You think about it. Would you rather have the ability to do 6 and 5 attacks with these disadvantages imposed, or would you rather have no disadvantages and have the ability to get very close to killing that BBEG? Now, the final thing I want to do is I want to compare the fighter's maneuvers. We didn't really use them for these killing tests, but you can see there's a lot more versatility in the DC20 fighting maneuvers. We have parry, bleed, slam, power attack, and sidestep. Now that's because you get 5 maneuvers by the time you hit 2nd level. If you're a D&D 5e character, you only get 3 maneuvers, but you got 4 superiority dice. It is limited. Now the only downside, if we look at the DC20 maneuvers, it costs an action point to use every single one, which means you're always going to lose an action point, but you do get to gain damage on some of these. If you look at the parries, they're kind of comparable to each other. They have the similar effects where they're increasing your PD or AC. If you look at the DC20 sidestep, it's pretty cool. You can get, when as a reaction, you can impose disadvantage on somebody's attack as you're just trying to move out of the way. I actually prefer the riposte, which if someone misses you with the melee attack, you can actually react with an attack using the riposte. It's really up to you. I think they're both really good systems. But the bottom line, every single martial in DC20 is pretty much a battle master. You have to choose maneuvers. But I think, in general, these maneuvers in DC20 do work better. There's a lot more options there. And that's pretty much it, everybody. I really just wanted to highlight the 2 different fighters, the most commonly used class, the most commonly used race, and really try to determine how much of their damage output, what their damage output is. We went through all the different attacks. Hopefully you got to get an idea of what it's like to be a fighter in DC20 compared to a fighter in D&D 5e, and really try to determine who is the better killer.
I didn't come here to play who's the better killer.
You decide. It's up to you. It's what you prefer. There's no wrongs As I've stated in the past, I actually prefer a little more complicated system. This is why I like DC20. But if you just want simplicity, D&D 5e is the way to go. I am Don Franco 3. This is RPG Boons, where we talk about everything RPG and how everything is RP. If you like the cut of my gibberish, please hit the subscribe button, leave a comment. I'll get back to you. And until then, Dungeon Coach, I'm still waiting for that phone call.